Hey guys, welcome back to the Piston Show. I'm Keshi Dylan, and today we have a very interesting video because we are sort of re-exploring the Omoda 5. Now this is a car that does not need an introduction. It's been quite popular in Malaysia and it has been making headlines ever since it was introduced, for good and for bad. But that everything aside, it has been quite well accepted by Malaysians, judging from sales figures alone. And who can blame them? It seems to offer almost everything, and just under 100k, really, you can't really fault it. Now, I know what you're thinking, that if you choose for the complete warranty package, the prices can go up to well above 110,000 ringgit. But then with starting price just under 100k, again, it seems to offer everything that you need. It's also quite spacious, it's nice to drive, well insulated and such. However, the game has changed, guys, because right now I have spent the last couple of days driving that car, the Chery Omoda E5. And right now, I am of the opinion that the Omoda E5 might just be a better buy than the Omoda 5, simply because it just does it a lot more better. What does it do? It drives better, it's better refined, it's just a better package. Again, it's also more expensive because at just under 147,000 ringgit, it's a full 47,000 ringgit more expensive than this lah. Right? But then again, I think it has a lot more to offer. So stick around and find out why I think the Omoda E5 might just be a better buy. And this is also a double header of a video, because I'm not only telling you why this is a better buy than this, but it's also a chance to explore the efficiency of an EV versus an internal combustion engine. Now, as we know, EVs perform better in traffic, when at lower speeds and such, whereas an internal combustion engine performs better at higher speed, at more constant traffic. When it comes to stop-start traffic, the internal combustion engine is horrible, whereas the EV is just in its element. So after this, we are going to take both cars out for a drive to close to 100 kilometers, put both these cars in comfortable and uncomfortable situations to see which comes out better. And by the end of this video, I'll be sort of be able to justify why the Omoda E5 is better than this, and then at the same time we'll also be able to tell you the efficiency levels of an internal combustion engine versus an EV in a real world setting here in Kuala Lumpur. Thank you for watching. Stick around, guys. If there's one thing for sure, that when it comes to design, the Omoda 5 seems to sort of look a little bit dated now. Perhaps because there are so many on our roads that we are always looking at one, and we are always, we're so exposed to the overall design of the Omoda 5. When it was first introduced, you're like, wow, what is this? This looks cool. And now you're just sort of jaded. And yeah, it's just sort of looking dated. That though looks a lot better, even though they're roughly about the same design, same car and such. But somehow the lack of a grille and the more angular design of the E5 makes it look very much like a concept car. And I just like this daytime running lights. I like the overall design of the E5. I gotta say, it's very handsome. The location of the charging port though, let me show you. The location of the charging port, well, it's good and bad, because it's obviously right up here, so you can sort of just drive into a charging port and you don't have to worry whether it's on the left or the right, unless you're looking at a Porsche Taycan, which has it on the left and the right. But here, it's just right up at the front. But the problem with this is that when you are charging the car, it's just sort of way too low. But after having charged this a few times, you sort of get used to it lah. So I'm just picking at bones over here. For me, I don't really have a problem with this. I do like to reverse park, so this sort of does take some getting used to. Anyway, again, picking at bones. As overall design, looks much better, even from the back. Let me show you. You know, one thing I can't stand about modern car design, I can't stand these fake exhaust vents. Those, what the hell? And on the Omoda 5, there are 2 of them. It's just so pretentious. But the good thing over here is that there are 2 exhaust tips, twin exhaust tips, and they're located at the back over there. So, irritating. Now we check out I don't want to take a look at this anymore. Now we check out the back of the E5, because I think this is a lot better. It just sort of looks a lot better as well. And you know, with the Omoda 5, even if there are exhaust tips, you're just better off just hiding it at the back rather than putting those fake exhaust vents. So nobody likes anything fake, right? But this is a much more handsome design as compared to the one on the Omoda 5. The E5 just carries this design a lot better. And I just noticed that this tiny spoiler over here, this sort of suits the car a lot better than the Omoda 5. So, but this is a simple fix. So if you have an Omoda 5 already, I'm sure you can just go to your closest body shop and get this installed. And talking about that, the good thing about the Omoda E5 as well as the 5 is that you get a really usable boot space. So this is something that you gotta give it to Chery. In terms of spare wheel though, no spare wheel. You do get a tire repair kit. I wish car makers would just sort of go back to offering spare wheels, because when it comes to, you know, if you do spring a leak or something, you really don't want to be waiting around for a tow truck to be coming, especially if you have kids in the car. So yeah. Now before we jump into the interior of the E5, I just sort of want to jog your memory on how the interior of the Omoda 5 looks like. Now we've seen plenty of videos, we've seen plenty of photos of the interior of the Omoda 5. And in all honesty, it's still a decent place. Just like the exterior, it's sort of starting to look a little bit dated. You can even see that the white surroundings around the edges of the seats, well, it's sort of starting to look a little bit faded. And but that's the interior of the Omoda 5. Again, I've never been a fan of these charge pads over here. I thought the overall fit finish quality is quite decent, especially for this price range. Now I show you the interior of the E5. Let's go. Check this out, guys. This is just wow, especially when you compare it to the Omoda 5, which is essentially the same car. But the interior is totally different. The dash is totally different. The seats though are the same. However, in here they look a little bit sportier, probably because of this graphics and such, and probably because of its color. The interior of the E5 is wrapped in a blue plus this beige color, which I'll be quite eager to see how it stands the test of time. And this, well, it looks like wood, but we all know that it's fake. In fact, it sort of just reminds me of, you know, that plastic covers that we used to put on our tables that look like wood, but they're not. Sort of reminds me of that. And don't know. That's one thing that I'm not a fan of. I would have preferred something sportier. But I do like the Burmester speakers. Of course, they're not Burmester, they're Burmester look-alike. And again, you get very Mercedes-Benz like buttons and knobs all around the car, particularly around here and such. We all know that Chery, especially around the Tiggo series, there's a lot of inspiration from Mercedes-Benz, particularly with the buttons and knobs. And that has sort of trickled down to the Omoda E5 as well. Now, the screens as well are bigger than the ones that you get on the Omoda 5. And overall, it's just a lot different, but there are some similarities as well, particularly the seats, the sound system, as well as the sunroof over here. The back seats again are the same as the ones on the Omoda 5. Space is not all that generous, particularly if you're on the taller side of the spectrum. But there's two things that I need to point out, is that in the E5 you only get a single air conditioning vent, where else on the regular Omoda 5 you get two, making it much more well adapted to accommodating passengers in the back seat. However, in the E5 you get twin USB ports, a Type A and a Type C. So your passengers, they may not have to argue over air conditioning vent, over the power sockets, but they'll definitely have to argue about the air conditioning vent. Now, before we hit the road, let's talk a little bit about the powertrains. Again, just to refresh you, the Omoda 5 is powered by 1.5 litre turbocharged 4-cylinder engine, making 156 horsepower and about 240 Newton meters of torque, where else the E5 is a lot more powerful. It makes about 204, 206 PS and about 340 Newton meters of torque. Now, when it comes to efficiency, the Omoda E5 is among the most efficient EVs, in fact, that I have driven. It's powered by a single front motor engine, and which is powered by lithium iron phosphate battery, somewhere about 66 kilowatt hour battery. And it's one of the EVs that I've driven that has sort of lived up to the manufacturer's WLTP claim. So Chery claims Omoda actually claims a WLTP range of 450 kilometers. And when I charged it up to 100% yesterday, I got a range of 440 kilometers. So that is quite spectacular. In fact, the closest that I've got to the manufacturer's claim. So full credit to the Omoda E5 over here. Now, before we hit the road, the E5 is charged up to 90% at the moment, with a range of about 390 kilometers, where else the Chery, the Omoda 5, is also at nearly full tank, and it has a range of roughly about 470 kilometers. But if you can hear, this thing has been on idle with the interior being cooled, where else this has been turned off in the name of, reducing carbon emissions and such. No, I'm just joking. We just forgot to turn it on. Anyway, once we hit the road, that's when we are going to see proper, fuel consumption, power consumption figures. So I'm not too worried about the range at the moment, because that is going to change. Anyway, I also think the Omoda E5 drives better than the Omoda 5. I'll explain more once we hit the road. Let's go. Driving the Omoda E5 generally feels like a nicer experience as compared to its petrol-powered sibling. Simply because the accelerator feels more connected, which is typical of an EV, so no surprises there. But for some reason, even the brake pedal feels nicer. So the general driving impression of the E5 is a lot more positive compared to the Omoda 5. Now, the Omoda 5, when I first drove the car, well, it was okay, but I didn't like the turbo lag. I didn't like how the brakes felt a little bit spongy. I just didn't like the overall driving experience. Good, far from great. Where else, the E5 is surprisingly good. Now, as I've already mentioned, Generally, EVs feel a lot more quicker, a lot more urgent, simply because power is readily accessible. You do not have to wait for the engine to respond. You don't have to wait for the turbos to spool up. None of that. So in here, it feels like a much nicer driving experience. Of course, when it comes to the steering, both cars have the same steering feel. They somehow have this
Please. Speed camera 400 meters ahead.
This onboard system is reminding me of a camera up ahead, but I'm just passing by the Sungai Buloh R&R, and I know that at Jajantas there's not going to be any speed cam. There's no permanent speed cam over there, so I have no idea what is going on about. But anyway, back to the steering feel. Steering of both cars feel a little bit dull, and there's this dead spot in between where you can just twitch the steering wheel a little bit to the left and right, and just sort of nothing happens. So that somehow seems to have become a hallmark of Chery cars, even the Jaiku, which I know is not a Chery brand, but a lot is shared between these two brands. Even that has a dead spot in the center. So I like steering wheels that feel a lot more connected to the wheels, but I'm not getting that with neither of these Omodas, and neither did I get it with the Jaiku. That's a different story. The other thing that I'd like to point out with the E5 is that the suspension is a lot nicer than the petrol-powered Omoda 5. The suspension setup is slightly different. McPherson struts and multi-links, whereas the ones on the Omoda 5 are a completely different setup. I can't remember exactly right now, but this results in a much nicer, more comfortable driving experience in the E5 than as compared to the Omoda 5. So that is also quite surprising. In that sense, I gotta give Chery credit for the way that the E5 drives. I think you have to experience this by yourself as well. I wish that you could just sort of compare the two as well. But if this video helps you if you're watching this video to help yourself make a purchase decision, then take my word on this, the E5 just feels nicer, offers a much better driving experience than the petrol-powered model. Now, besides that, refinement is brilliant. We're hardly hearing anything about the world outside, just very hushed, very minimal. So in that sense, you got to give Chery credit, because at just under 147,000 ringgit, they've done a brilliant job. Credit is due where it's deserved. Now, when it comes to efficiency, it's a different ball game. Now, the petrol-powered car has a 51-litre tank, and this E5 has a 61 kilowatt-hour battery. So I did some research last night, and I found out that per litre of fuel is roughly equivalent to about 6.7 or 6.8 kilowatt hour. So in that sense, the E5, if you're going to equate the size of the battery to a fuel tank, roughly has a fuel tank size of about 38 liters, which means that it has a smaller capacity than the petrol-powered car. So naturally, we are going to get lower range in the E5 as compared to the Omoda 5. But then again, just to recap, we started off this journey at about 90% with about 380 kilometer range. Right now, we just passed by the Sungai Buloh Jajantas R&R. We are at 80% range with 80% state of charge, with a 345 kilometer range. So in that sense, we are not down by that much. However, we've been driving on the highway, which is not ideal for any EVs. EVs excel at lower speeds, they excel in traffic, they excel in those kind of situations. Not at the highway, not at higher speeds. The state of charge just drops like an anchor. Where else for the petrol-powered car, at higher speeds it becomes more efficient. So it's quite contrasting. From here we're going to go to Jalan Duta, get stuck in traffic along Jalan Sultan Ismail, deliberately to put both these cars in comfortable and uncomfortable situations to sort of finally gauge which has the better efficiency. I'm hoping we get this right. So when it comes to efficiency, the Omoda E5 and the Omoda 5 are obviously very different creatures. So the Omoda 5 is obviously powered by a petrol engine, and the problem with petrol engines is that they're not very efficient when it comes to harnessing heat as well as energy. So you get a lot of energy lost through heat, where else EVs are very efficient in that sense through their regenerative braking. So that's why you have regenerative braking in EVs as well as in hybrids. So in that sense, you got to give it to what Chery has achieved with the Omoda E5, because they claim a WLTP range of 450 kilometers on 100% state of charge. So I saw a real world range of a little over 420 kilometers with 99% state of charge. Fantastic, right? So when we filled up the 51 liter fuel tank of the Omoda 5, we saw a range of about 490 kilometers, which not that much different. But then again, you may want to ask how much it costs. But because our petrol is subsidized, so it's not exactly an apple-to-apple comparison. What is an apple-to-apple comparison is the energy consumption of the E5 and the fuel consumption of the Omoda 5. So just now, I just took a quick look at the Omoda 5, and it's doing an astonishing 7 liters per 100 km. That is fantastic. But here though, in the E5, I'm doing, right now, at this moment, 13.3 kilowatt hour per 100 km. And guess what? Omoda claims that the E5 has a class-leading consumption of 15.5 kilowatt hour per 100 km. So right now, I'm already doing better than the claimed range of Chery. So in that sense, absolutely fantastic. And I really think that when it comes to real-world driving, you can sort of go through your day-to-day business and just worry about charging your car once a week. That's provided you're doing maybe 50-60 km per day or less than that, then this is definitely the car to go for. There are a couple of things that also annoy me about the E5, such as the fact that if I was feeling cold and I wanted to turn the air conditioning down, I had to go back to the main menu, which is 1 step, 2 step, 3 step, 4 steps. 4 steps just to adjust the air conditioning on this Omoda E5. And it's the same for the petrol-powered Omoda 5 as well. And this is a bit of a inconvenience of sorts. And this is something that is typical of Chinese models. It's not just something that is unique to Chery and the Omoda series. No, almost every other Chinese car maker has this problem. The only difference over here is we are not getting a gargantuan screen. But talking about that, it's actually quite a massive screen as well. So in terms of driving experience, fantastic. That is an inconvenience. Energy efficiency, brilliant. I still have a range of 306 kilometers with a 71% state of charge left. We're going to go park our cars to conclude this video, and I should be able to tell you shortly which is more efficient in that sense. I'll be right back. So in conclusion, even though both these cars look alike, the E5 offers a much nicer driving experience. It's more refined, the suspension is nicer, the powertrain feels a lot more natural in the E5. So out of these two, the E5 actually is probably the nicer car to drive. And this takes me back to the question which I was asking earlier on, whether is this actually more efficient than the petrol powered sibling. The answer is the E5 did about 13.3 kilowatt hour per 100 km, whereas this did 7.4 liters per 100 km. Now, it still has a range of 513 kilometers, whereas the E5 has a range of about 298 kilometers left. Now, does this really mean that the E5 is the least efficient model between these two? To answer that question, we have to sort of go back to the fuel tank and the battery size of the car. So before we get to that, we also have to sort of convert the kilowatt hour into liters per 100 km. So I got this in my phone because we did the calculations already. So it consumed 13.3 kilowatt hour per 100 km, whereas this consumes 7.4 liters per 100 km. Now let's convert this into liters per 100 km so it's easier for us to understand. Now, according to the calculations over here, according to the formula, to get liters of petrol, we need to divide the energy in kilowatt hour divided by energy content per liter. So over here we need to divide 13.3 by the energy content per liter, which is 8.9, and we get 1.49 liters, which means even though this did 7.4, which is quite good already, the E5 did 1.49 liters per 100 kilometers, which is just fantastic in a petrol sense. Now, the other thing that we have to sort of understand and convert is the size of the fuel tank, because the Omoda 5 has a 51 liter tank, whereas the E5 has a 61 kilowatt hour battery pack. How big is 61 kilowatt hour in liters? So the same theory applies, the same formula applies, and we get, if you divide 61 kilowatt hour divide by the energy content per liter, which is 8.9, you get an answer of 6.85 liters. So this only has a theoretical fuel tank of 6.85 liters, whilst this has 51 liters of fuel tank in terms of the fuel tank size. So in that sense, I'm not sure if this actually makes sense in the real world. Perhaps not, because the cost to charge a EV is still very much higher than it costs to refuel a petrol powered car, simply because our fuel here in Malaysia is heavily subsidized. And yeah, I kind of hope that it continues to be subsidized as well. Yes, I'm from that train of thought, but that's a different story. So when it comes to recharging an EV, if you have a home charger, it probably makes more sense. Or if you have access to a AC charger somewhere nearby your house, then it will probably be a lot more cheaper. For example, yesterday I had to recharge this car from 45% up to 100%, and let me just show you how much it costed me. I used a 47 kilowatt DC charger, and it took me an hour and 12 minutes to charge from 40 to 100%, and it costed me 59 ringgit and 8 cents. Expensive lah, but that's the convenience of recharging it quickly. So I recharged it at the curve, and 59 ringgit for the sake of this video shoot, acceptable to me, not a problem. And in terms of efficiency, yes, this is a lot more efficient. It's not exactly apple to apple, but hey, to answer the question of efficiency, the Omoda E5 is a lot more efficient. In terms of refinement, the E5 is a lot more refined. In terms of driving experience, the E5 offers a better driving experience. Yes, it's about 40 over 1,000 ringgit more expensive, and there's a lot more petrol stations around this country than there are chargers. On that note alone, the Omoda 5 probably is the most sensible buy, but if you have money to spare and you don't mind the entire EV charging journey, this is probably the model to go for. As usual guys, thank you for watching. I hope I answered your question. If I didn't, do leave all your questions down in the comments section below and I'll try to answer everything. As usual, thank you for watching. Do consider subscribing.